So in graveyards, sometimes you'll find places where there's just a crack in the earth. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the spirits did it or anything like that, but you'll find that the spirits are easier to offer to or access if there's some kind of natural occurring crack. It's just kind of where the graveyard it expels its own like buildup of energy in a way, connecting it with the sky, if that makes any sense. But it's a really good place to maybe do a little offering of something like Florida water. Spirits of this graveyard, for the sake of your ease and comfort, and to honor you, I offer you this Florida water. Sorry, I had to take the cap off. It's good to offer it right along the crack. Hail the spirits, hail the dead. Hail the spirits, hail the dead. Hail the spirits, hail the dead. Sometimes you'll find things in graveyards that don't quite make sense, but obviously had significance to the individuals involved. But this person was born 1877 and died 1949. So this statue, this little award here, probably wasn't that way. It couldn't have been that person. But this award, I can't think of the word for it. Anyway, trophy, there we go. It obviously had some kind of meaning to either the family or somebody who's working with this grave. It's not quite clear, but usually I would recommend not to mess with things like that and just kind of leave them as they are. But it's always interesting to kind of find things like that don't quite make sense, and sometimes somebody just left something, but I feel like that had some significance, and that's why it's there. You'll also find a lot of gravestones that are either old or like, that doesn't even look like the same kind of material. It looks like they buried right next to a much older grave. Sometimes that just happens when the earth shifts, or when, sometimes tombstones come out of the ground when the soil is moved or whatever. And sometimes people just kind of leave fragments of marble places, but you'll also see that a lot in graveyards. You might even see stacks of something like that with the words mother or son on it. And they just made a whole bunch of them, and then they kind of left them off to the side in the graveyard. I saw one stack like that at a different graveyard. So a lot of the time when you see a kind of like a log kind of pillar gravestone, it's usually I wouldn't say usually, but a lot of the time it's a Freemason lodge that chose to do that. And this particular graveyard was run by like a Freemason lodge. So you do see a few of these here. They become really good focal points because they're kind of like obelisks, and energy just kind of shoots up them because it just naturally goes that way. The energy of a graveyard, whereas a lot of like the box graves, the energy is, I wouldn't say contained, but it's not as attractive for the energy in a graveyard to really travel up something like that. But this kind of shape, yes. Like, there's an obelisk over there I've worked with, and that energy just shoots up that thing like crazy. And another thing, this graveyard, or whoever takes care of it, has been really good about putting up little signs, little posts for vets, various wars. This graveyard actually has quite a few Confederate soldier little grave markers like that. Here's the thing. How do I say this? The dead don't really discriminate like they do during life. They all just kind of are the same thing. I mean, that might be obvious to some people, but if you don't like, I don't like the Confederacy, obviously, but I wouldn't let that necessarily hamper you offering to certain graves or working with various graves, because they all kind of feel the same. I mean, just from working with graveyard energy for a long time, they all just kind of feel the same, unless something very traumatic happened, and then that grave just feels different. But you know, of course, I don't think anybody, or not many people, have anything against World War I or II vets, but yeah, see, this is another World War II one. But yeah, they all kind of feel the same way for the most part, to be completely honest. And that's interesting right there, actually. Meemaw. And then you got the, a lot of people think that that's like hook 'em horns. It's actually a way of blessing somebody. I'm not sure if it started with, but there was this member of this band who started doing it, and then everybody else started doing it. But his grandma or his mom would bless people like that. But it's not just from that one guy. It's been around for a long time, but it's always interesting to see something like that. Somebody had a little bit different thinking. And obviously, beautiful little swans that I wouldn't mess with. See, this is a good little spot for a ritual. Do you see how this earthwork is kind of contained by, that's an interesting breakage right there, by the way. But it's kind of contained. Of course, you want to honor Christian graves with Christian offerings or prayers, or just, you could just say hail the dead or hail the spirits. You can also do that. But just keep in mind that I wouldn't do necessarily say like a satanic ritual around Christian graves. It's kind of disrespectful, and they can't really speak up for themselves. So I try to be very sensitive to people's religion when they're dead. Well, I mean, even when they're not dead, but especially when they're dead. So if I was gonna do a ritual here, I'd have to use you know, Christian prayers and Christian things, but especially on little enclosures. But something like a crossroads like this over here, that is more fair game for other kinds of rituals that aren't just not mainly Christian or partly Christian. This is a little bit more fair game. And also, crossroads and graveyards is a really potent spot. But once again, even at a crossroads, if there's a lot of Christian graves around, I try to be respectful of the dead. And I try to be sensitive to them. Maybe that's why they give me so much energy, but I try to be respectful to the dead, and that's really vital, and you always got to keep that in mind. Like, you might think it's cool to do like, ooh, a satanic ritual in the graveyard at midnight in the crossroads. Like, I mean, it sounds kind of cool, but it's not really caring about the dead. You know what I mean? Like, it just, if there's Christian graves around and you're doing something like that, it's a little bit disrespectful. I'm not saying that you shouldn't do it at a crossroads, but it's a little bit disrespectful. And really, a big part of graveyard work is empathy and sympathy for and with the dead. That's how you really connect to them. And you know, it shouldn't be just a selfish thing to where like you just respect them in order to get what you want. No, in order to be an effective grave worker, you have to actually care. Because you can't really lie to the dead. They don't communicate like that. They kind of can see through you in a way the living often can't. We got another vet right there. That is a Confederate vet. Yep. To my point. But yeah, here's another thing about war, guys, that a combat vet said in a video recently, that so much human suffering happens just to return to the status quo. And there's so many people that die that could have done other things and evolved and grown. And I have great sympathy for people trying to defend their lands against somebody, but so many invasions, there's so many decades just trying to return to some status quo, and there's so many life lost, and there's so much time wasted. War's terrible, and the human cost is often overlooked, and people are just counted as far as how many that died, but every single one of those people had a family, had dreams, hopes, good qualities, bad qualities. Every single human being has that. I mean, that might be obvious, but I don't think we really think about that when we think about war. And it's something that I try to constantly think about. And same with the dead, like these people are just named, like, it's just a name, and it's just when they were born and died. Like, I feel like it just doesn't do it justice. I feel like we should have gravestones that are a little bit more like of what the person believed or wanted to communicate after they died. But in a way, it's also a tragedy that, you know, it's simplified to just the name and then when they were born and died. I hope some of this is making sense. But like every single one of these gravestones was a human being with a whole life experience that was completely different than ours, or maybe some were similar, but we just got to think of them as, these are not just stones or numbers. These are people. These are people. And here's another enclosure. That one's a little wonky. I'm not really sure why. And then we have another log over there. Just never trivialize. Jesus, the word. Trivialize. I think that's the word. Never trivialize death or do something in a graveyard because you think it's cool. Like, these are real people. And the more compassion and love that you try to feel towards them, at first you might have to fake it, but over time, the more you try, the more you actually feel the love that you are trying to communicate. And once you get to that level, it's a whole another wonderful experience of like they really want to connect with you. And I didn't get that for a long time. So for instance, I didn't actually think that this would still be here, but I did this ritual and offered these beads like years ago, it had to be, and that candle years ago. I'm glad they didn't move the beads. I always feel like I should pick up the candle glass, come back and pick it up, but that's something the earth can like absorb. Plastic is something it can't, and those beads aren't plastic, but plastic it can't. So glass is more okay in metal and like coins, but you got to be careful with plastics, because if the earth can't absorb it, then it's not going to interact with the spirits very well either. I mean, so I wouldn't leave plastic per se, and I don't know if these are plastic, but see, when I did this ritual, this little sign wasn't up, so I didn't know that this person was a Confederate. But it didn't really matter, because they feel the same, and you have to have sympathy for everyone. Even people that might be invading other countries that you might hate right now, if they're dead, they're human beings that are dead. And they feel the same, and it kind of, all the energy just kind of merges together, if that makes sense. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, power, and glory, forever and ever. Amen.